Good afternoon. Ready Row USA is live on the air now, and we're here with our special guest, Carol Schoenecker. Hi, Carol.
Hello, thanks for
And
having
we'll
me.
introduce her in a second, but I wanted to let people know some exciting developments here, one of which is at Ready Row USA. I'm Charlotte Pierce, the producer, and we have a new sponsor. We're very grateful for Sykes making this uh, podcast possible, this episode, and they are the Australian-based producer of racing shells. I actually just bought one, and I'm thrilled with it. It got some free speed out of it, I think. They will be at the head of the Charles near the finish line. So if you're going up there next week, please check in with Fabio Selvig, and he will. He just loves talking about rowing, first of all, but he will show you the boats, and they're really trying to break into the U.S. market, I think, with some very promising success. And he also represents Resolute. So there's a couple of options for you. Thank you, Sykes. And I'm going to introduce now Carol Schoenecker. She's the head rowing coach at Robert Morris University, not Roger. Hi, Carol, and thank you so much for being patient as we scheduled this. I really am excited about talking to you about your research and your position as one of the few head coaches in rowing, collegiate rowing, hopefully growing number of people. But you are really leading the way, and we really appreciate having you on. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. I'm excited to be here. I love talking about rowing too, so this is perfect.
Yeah, so you have how many crews do you have under your in your rowing program?
Robert Morris, I think we have close to 40 athletes right now. And then I also coach at Three Rivers Rowing, so we have about 50 masters athletes on my team there. So lots of community in the rowing.
Great. And so you're in Pittsburgh, Robert Morris. We should clarify that. And Three Rivers is in Pittsburgh as well.
Yes.
Yeah, and you're on the board of Three Rivers.
Yes.
And coach there. Yeah, cool. Well, I wanted to mention that just as you listen to this program, please use our hashtag, and we'll tell you that at the end. So we're trying to get people to listen to the end. I think you'll be really happy that you did. Carol's got a lot to say about diversity and representing women in rowing and all people in rowing, really. But Carol, why don't you tell us a little bit about your research, and I might ask you some questions along the way. We might get some also coming in from our listeners. So awesome. Please go ahead.
Well, I should start by saying a little bit of my history is I graduated from Bucknell University, where I rowed, and began my coaching career at Duquesne University, also in Pittsburgh, with my former novice and varsity coaches from high school. So I had a lot of great mentorship there. But from Duquesne, when I got my master's, I went into education and then got a teaching position in rural Louisiana with Teach for America. So being a teacher was really what I just thought I was going to spend the rest of my life doing. My master's degree is in public policy. So educational policy was something I was familiar with. But the systemic inequity within education, and especially public education too, was a lot more stark than I expected when I got to Louisiana. Very poor parish, the smallest parish, the last to desegregate legally in the United States. And I had studied abroad in Ghana and Benin and Togo. So I thought I was used to rural environments, but the poverty that we see in rural America was still so much more than I thought I would see, especially the third world country as developed as the US. So leaving Louisiana, my first instinct is, I don't know enough about this. How am I going to learn more about how to address these issues that prevent my students, who I'm still very close to, from learning? And was going to go to Temple's PhD program in urban education, but this position opened up at Robert Morris as an assistant coach. And I'm talking with our former head coach, Nellie Stahora, who's still working at Robert Morris. The feel of the university, the demographics of the university, and the mission of the program was so aligned to what I felt like my students were missing in terms of social emotional development and having the support system and having people there who really care about you and allow you to grow and are meeting your needs, that I decided that that position was what I wanted to do. And I think coaches are educators. We are educators. So we have that responsibility too. So it kind of met the needs that I wanted in the classroom. So 3.5 years ago, I started a doctoral program at Duquesne in educational leadership and decided to weed my own backyard, which is their advice, and look at how educational equity affects collegiate rowing, specifically with my athletes in my team. So of course, is very blue collar. I think a lot of rowing programs, especially at the collegiate level, tend to be a little bit more white collar. We are a little bit more of an elitist sport. So I think the demographic and the feel of the team that I was coaching was a lot more, it resonated more with me in the way that I grew up, and especially resonated with Pittsburgh, which is a very blue collar, steel city, gritty kind of feel. And especially on the rivers, you can see that history and the skeletons of those steel mills all along.
Yeah, I know. It's an amazing city, and the transformation has been pretty interesting in the last few years. Yeah. So,
and I think that kind of influenced the direction that I ended up going. So I talked with some of my athletes and realized that the narrative, the stories of Black female athletes in the collegiate level are basically non-existent. There's a lot of literature on Black male athletes, especially with football and basketball, and that's a different area of research on the inequity there. But Black women are largely absent from the narrative altogether. And when you look at Title IX, which benefited me going into college as a first-generation college student, Title IX enhanced rowing, enhanced soccer, enhanced lacrosse on the women's side the most. And those are some of the most underrepresented sports in terms of racial diversity. And looking just in the NCAA database, and you can see here, we have an enormous number in our sport of athletes and very little representation specifically.
160 of 7,000?
And this was 2019, so I haven't looked at the updated.
Wow.
This is predated.
So, well, I can't imagine like someone coming from just like the challenges, the hurdles, the strength of character you'd have to kind of get through that and be successful as an athlete, and just the kind of will to succeed must be tremendous.
And then when you look at, I started asking why. Obviously there was such low representation. There are a lot of different reasons, but something that I started noticing early on, given the demographics of the students that we are pulling into RMU, the eligibility center through the NCAA limits participation pretty starkly in our program. So early identification happens in football and basketball because these coaches are tracking these athletes from a very young age. Like a lot of time it's like 6th grade, 7th grade, they're identifying these athletes and they can track them.
I was going to say high school, but that's not even, that's even before that.
Some football players sign or commit verbally like as a freshman in high school. I can't even imagine. But rowers a lot of times don't start or enter the sport until much later. So if you're not on track to being eligible then, unless you have someone who I can identify you earlier, then you're out an opportunity to even walk onto a team.
I should mention that we have some slides. If you're listening in audio, I'll put them on the show notes. But Carol, why don't you tell me if you want me to flip to the next one? And
go ahead and flip to the next one.
Okay, got it. So
awesome. So this is a little bit of information on representation. But the limited access and equity and opportunity, especially coming out of high school for a lot of women of color and low-income women, was insane. And I was having novices who walked on with 4.0 GPAs and perfect SAT scores who weren't eligible to compete because of where they grew up and where they went to school. So that just shows how systemic this issue is. So it's much deeper rooted. And like, okay, so this is a bigger problem than I even thought. So when I sat down to do my actual research, I asked 4 of my Black athletes if they would be interested in doing a series of storytelling circles. First, talking about their own stories and what brought them to rowing and their why and what brought them to Robert Morris. But then the second circle focused more on their intersecting identities, what they had in common and what was different. The athletes were recruited. 2 of them were novice walk-ons. I had one who was a freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior at the time. So they were at different parts of their collegiate career. And then they talked about what we were going to do moving forward. And the information I got from listening to their stories, because I wasn't there, another big issue that I had was there's an obvious power discrepancy between me being their head coach and then the athletes. So I basically provided them lunch and snacks and then left them to their own devices. And they reported these 2-hour-long storytelling sessions.
So you kind of removed yourself from that. And did you get a sense that was really important for the four of them to have each other?
Yeah. And that came out right away. And I think right after the first one, I ended up having to cut them off because one of them had to go to class. Initially, I thought it was going to be an hour long. And then it was like 3 hours later. And I'm like, hey.
Now, had they known each other before they came in? Or did they kind of bring each other in? Or
they kind of brought each other in. I mean, they had been on the team for a while. And the freshmen who had come in had been recruited basically by one of the sophomore, junior athletes. Because when they come for official visits, it's like, this is someone I want to be on the team with me. So they ended up really talking about, well, first of all, after that first session, one of the athletes came out. I'm going to call her Wakesho, but she said, I gave them all pseudonyms, obviously, for privacy reasons. She said that she felt lighter. So lighter. How important having a space that is truly safe
for
them actually was. And it didn't occur to me, obviously, as a white woman and their coach, like how infrequent they have those spaces in their day-to-day lives.
Well, interesting. Yeah. I mean, this is all. Now, did you get a sense from them or any information from them about what might be helpful for people from their community to like get this idea and kind of latch onto the idea of rowing as a sport to pursue?
Well, we talked a lot about responsibility of being more equitable in our recruiting practices. So being more out in the community. In Pittsburgh in general, like Robert Morris takes a lot of local students. It has a large number of students from the Pittsburgh area and from public schools. There's not a lot of youth rowing for Pittsburgh public schools at the moment. Three Rivers is working on it, and there's more of a push for that. Yeah. But there's nothing that says we can't go in and start recruiting walk-ons earlier or introduce this as an opportunity. And
yeah, I know you've probably talked to Arshay Cooper about what he does with high schools and, swimming lessons, bring the ergs, pizza. That's like the three things.
Always gets them in the door and then their attention.
Exactly. But it's, you're familiar with these, there's a couple of programs like, the Gold Cup Fund. And then there's Stem to Stern, I think it's called. Yeah. It just seems like more of a systemic, because you could go into a high school, the context isn't there yet, but yeah. Go ahead. Yeah, I interrupted you.
Well, and I think this push on community and how important it is to be in the community and to tell these stories, I think is incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
Their voices are important. And for a space, again, like Black women are largely invisible. So to amplify their voices was an incredibly empowering experience for them. Awesome. And their leadership is huge. So they talked a lot of different things came out of this. So they talked a lot about microaggressions from across campus, from professors and their teammates, obviously. And what we ended up doing was we had previously done a very intentional DEI programming with the team, but we shuffled up our entire leadership model. So we have a leadership team, and it's a lot more distributed because this is not my team. It's their team. My job is to support them in reaching their goals. And
so leadership within the rowing program? Okay.
We have 6 chairs, and one of my athletes, who's now a senior, who did this, is our social justice chair. So she sat down with me this summer, and we wrote out a really in-depth cultural humility program that we require 2 sessions a month. So every other Thursday is a required team talk. And then the other alternating Thursdays are a challenge by choice. So if this is
when you say cultural humility, I'm sorry, what do you mean by that? From the white perspective or from the?
Well, cultural humility, I used to dig into cultural competency, like those buzzwords a lot, but cultural competency, I think, separates the individual from the group. So cultural humility is a lifelong process of self-reflection. So when we started viewing this, a lot of this is getting into all athletes on our team to really honor their own identities. And I think young women in particular are almost afraid of knowing themselves because there's this constant, like, am I good enough? where are
Yeah.
my failures? These expectations have been put on me. And so there's a few to really like stand in their own rainbow and enjoy it, like who they
Got
are.
it. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I mean, it doesn't go away when you get older. I can tell you that.
so
I mean, yeah,
programming starts with that individual identity and honoring
sure. Yeah.
itself. And then we can see how all of our identities as a team intersect to bring this speed on the water and this magic on the water. And I'm a little more touchy-feely, but I think for our sport in particular, that intersecting identity, how you move and trust and appreciate the people around you leads to speed. And Everett Morris isn't winning NCAAs, obviously. And I don't think that'll happen later on, but it's been interesting to see that the athletes that we've brought in on an erg and on paper are not as fast, but on the water, we've had a lot more success in the last 2 years than we've ever had before. So there's definitely a correlation between how they interact with each other and what they bring to the communities around them and just boat speed too. So I think that's how you try to get the buy-in of like, why should we take time with this? Why is this important?
Yeah, and it is when you were going through all this with them and writing your dissertation and trying to implement these things, what were the like main obstacles, or did you have setbacks, or did you have like disappointments, or things that didn't work, or I'm just wondering, was it all sort of a growing and learning experience? Or
I think honestly the only thing that would be considered a setback wasn't really a setback. COVID factored in. So initially the plan was to do all of these story selling circles in person because I think that enhances the experience. So 2 of them, they had to switch to Zoom, but I don't think it interrupted anything that they were doing or the content that they were doing. And I feel like for me, I mean, listening to them helped me get to know myself a little bit better. And my dissertation chair, who is the Dean of Education at Duquesne and is one of the most amazing women I've ever met, really had to sit me down and tell me that if I was expecting my athletes to be vulnerable and open and share their story, then I needed to share mine with them.
Oh, that is amazing. Yeah, that must have been very revealing. Huh?
So, and that was, and they brought that up to the athletes, brought that up. So it was like halfway through the 4th. So
you're not going to get out of this without telling us.
I got a text message. I had set up Zoom in the library, and I went up to my room, just left them go, and I got a text that was like, "Come back down." And then they were like, "We need to interview you. There are some questions that we have."
Wow. Yeah.
Because, if we're going to build this program, and you are a key part of this too, and we need to know more about why you care so much. Understand. So, and it was interesting because I was really nervous. I was really nervous being like so open and transparent with my athletes. But I think like the trust has increased a lot. I'm not nearly as afraid at saying that I screw up routinely because I do. Ally is a lifelong process and I mess up daily. And I told them, I'm like, I'm inevitably going to disappoint you. But
the humility that strikes me, that phrase, it's just again and again, when I read it on your material, just because you and I, operate as white women, or it's so hard to kind of live someone else's experience, and we can't help but just kind of operating in our privilege unless we try and break it down and put ourselves.
And I think it's interesting, and I'll let you know how it works out. But this year, one of the things we switched is that when we start talking about the nitty-gritties of like race and equity and privilege, that we're going to do affinity groups because there are enough women of color on our team now where they can have a substantial group. So obviously, when you're starting out with these DEI initiatives, the impact of being the only woman of color on a team of white women is huge on that person. But now we kind of have critical mass. So
do you feel like you're drawing more diversity in the program now? Is that?
I think inevitably, when you see people who look like you, representation does matter.
Yeah.
So it gives, like there is a space where I feel like I can fit in.
Yeah.
We have a lot of work to do and a lot to go, obviously, but we have 10 women of color on our team. So that's about a quarter of the team are women of color now. And so really excited about the conversation that they're going to have. I'm going to bring in people from one of my best friends from my dissertation program to kind of moderate their affinity group. And then they told me, they were like, you being a white woman talking to our white teammates about privilege and telling them how privileged you are is going to make them open up a little bit more. Because a lot of that vulnerability, that being open and being like, I don't know, I'm going to make mistakes, and then being okay with that, I think is some conversation. And so it's also that push of like, doing hard things, really embracing discomfort is going to lead to growth here in this space, but also that's rowing.
Yeah. And do you find
that really embracing that discomfort is going to lead to growth in almost every aspect of your life. So
do you find that the rowers of color sometimes they just want to row and not think about all this other stuff? Or
some of them
just want to be rowers,
be as engaged as they want to. Some of them are not. We're also doing a leadership development not curriculum, but like a course, and we disc profiled. So everyone in our leadership team did a disc profile. So we have like our leadership styles. So we've been working through like what that means in terms of how we interact with each other, and also leveraging strengths and weaknesses and where we should branch out of our comfort zones. So it's been interesting to see the young woman who wrote the curriculum with me came out as being a very dominant leadership style. So she is like, I'm at every protest. I am talking about this at the time. I am, very passionate about this.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's like that of like, some people don't want to be in the middle of the protest.
Yeah.
They want to process and own their own story and their identity in their own way. And we need to be okay with that.
So it's a learning experience for them too. Yeah. Carol, I'd like to just make sure that people know, if you're listening on the audio, this is Carol Schoenecker. She's a recent doctoral award, last year, right? You got your.
I just finished, so officially.
Awesome. And my friend Richard Butler was your advisor, I hear.
Yes. Program.
Former ED at Three Rivers, and she's with DEI committee co-chair at US Rowing now, right?
Yeah. He's the webinar tonight, I think.
Yeah. So hi, Richard. Anyway, so and Carol's the head coach at Robert Morris University in Pittsburgh. Anything else you wanted to say about your program, or like is there an implementation thing? Like, are you going to put practical things into or carry out some more of these?
Well, we have a year-long curriculum that's been adjusted from the research. So I'm interested to see how it plays out. And like this tomorrow we're doing an exercise on empathic listening. Yeah. And we're going to do story mapping after that. So it's really cool to see the effects as we go. And I make them journal every week and turn in their journals. And this is something that I almost implemented from being an elementary school teacher.
Yeah.
Sometimes kids aren't as comfortable telling you what's wrong, but they'll write it out. So
that's interesting.
We have prompts with the team too, where they'll answer some questions about technique and how the week went, and then we'll have like an additional prompt. And they turn it in, and then the coaches read it, and we write feedback back.
So these are your rowers, or your?
Yeah, these are our rowers.
Do you also teach classes at the university, or?
I don't right now. I have been adjunct at Duquesne.
I see. Yeah.
One class.
Right.
I'm not teaching right now.
We have one comment from listener Lily Lively. She says, "I'm so impressed by coaches with strong educational resumes," and that is the truth. That's great. And we need more people like you, Carol. Duplicate yourself if you can. I think you're kind of in the process of doing that in some ways, but thank you for coming. And we're going to close it out now. We'd like to encourage people to use the hashtag ReadyRowUSA on social media, and then we'll kind of lurk around and spot you and give you little prizes and wonderful things, because our vendors and our sponsors give us things to give you. So ReadyRowUSA is the hashtag, and my company is Pierce Press. All the archives for the podcast are on piercepress.com. There's more to the URL, but if you get there, you can just go to the podcast tab on the top there. We have children's books about diversity and sustainability and environmental things. We've won some awards in the last few years with those. 2 Purple Dragonfly Story Monsters Awards. And most of all, we'd like to have our listeners engaged in the program. So I'd love to have small clubs, big clubs, well-funded clubs and waterside clubs. Just send us in. We'll profile you in one of our club spotlights. So on that, on the peerspress.com/ReadyRowUSA, you can link up to the form that you can use to just tell us your news. If you have a new hire, or if you need somebody, or need a coach, need a coxswain, put it on there and we'll mention it on the air. And in our show notes, we also have a gadgets and gear regular episode, and we're gearing up for that. We have some really great, we're going to do the oarboard rower, and then there's a guy who's developed a remote coxswain for blind rowers. So we're going to have Bob Berry on to demonstrate that. So it's kind of fun. So Carol, if you have any clubs that you want to do you think we should highlight, I'd love to hear about them.
I'll fill out the form.
Yeah, please do. Please do. And again, Ready Row USA is the hashtag. Please use it and subscribe on YouTube and all that good stuff, because it helps us out a lot. And we are going to close out here, and we're actually going to, in a couple weeks, we'll have a preview of the U.S. Rowing Convention with Sarah McAuliffe and Samantha Wenderlin from U.S. Rowing. So they're going to be on and kind of preview the convention in December. So please tune in for that. You can get the link on peerspress.com, or Instagram is ready.row.usa. Thanks again. And we're going to wind it up here, Carol. Please stay in touch, and we'll be following your progress.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Carol.